computer. Okay, so welcome again, friends. Great to have you here. Stephen Fetter here from United in Learning, and uh, lovely to gather with you again one last time as we move through Holy Week and on towards Easter. For those of you who are joining us through the recording, you've missed all of our conversations about Palm Sunday, and sorry about that. You'll just have to come live the next time, right? But it's for those of you who are joining me here live right now, it's been fun to kind of debrief the week. It's the stuff that we're reading together is so relevant to the life we're going through, eh? Not just liturgically, but also politically and in every other way. So, welcome and good to have you here. Let me bring up my candle again, as I have been doing every time. And if you have a candle there, I'll invite you to light yours there as I light mine here. And take a moment to think about where we're at in the last week of Jesus' life. We have lived through Palm Sunday. We have watched Jesus teaching in the temple, surrounded by those adoring crowds and being protected by them, really, and then running off into hiding outside the city every night so that he wouldn't be scooped up by the Romans. What a courageous, decisive time for him, and a risky, terrifying one, too. We pack so much into this week, it's hard to keep it all straight. But here we are in Tuesday of Holy Week, moving on towards Wednesday and then Thursday and then the catastrophe of Friday. Trusting that even as we gather, there is light to find, even as the frightening things surrounded him, there was light to share. And so we'll light our candles and give thanks for that light, for the light that he brought into the world, for the light that he shared with us, for all the things that he taught in that last week of his life, for all the ways in which he rose to the decisive moment that presented itself to him. And so we give thanks for his ministry and for ours and the light that is with us still, and for the reminder always that we are not alone. Thanks be to God. Let me invite you one last time to add into your chat an acknowledgement of the territory where you are sitting today, remembering the people who have been nourished by the land you're sitting on for millennia, thousands of years before my ancestors came to this land. All the different ways in which it supported them, in which they cared for it, all the ways in which their lives and the life of the land were intertwined in mutuality and respect. Well, I'm acknowledging the Chippewas, who have the closest First Nation community to the town of Aurora, where I live. I'm recognizing Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. And just as you finish up with that, thank you for sharing, by the way. Let me remind you of the homework from last week. We were talking about muscle memory and improvising hope. And I had invited you not just to think about the hymns in your church service last Sunday, but to just sort of move through your life last week and think about what you were doing out of muscle memory instead of out of focused intention, and how that muscle memory from the disciplines and practice you have followed in your lives have shaped and informed the kinds of choices you made. What did you notice? My daughter had some surgery yesterday, and as we were debriefing it last night, I found myself moving into pastoral care mode, realizing that that's very much muscle memory for me these days. I was saying all the same things and making all the empathetic noises that I make whenever I'm visiting somebody who's had surgery. It wasn't just because it was my daughter. That was kind of funny to say, "Oh, I guess I'm working."
I have a question. I
Yes.
can't type, but I can talk.
Sure.
Um, is muscle memory responsible for us wanting to sing the
Mhm. Visiting,
familiar tunes? That's
visiting,
often
visiting the cemetery to mark the
Yeah,
anniversary.
might well be. That's a really interesting question. We need both, don't we? We need the new hymns as well as the old ones. Let me invite you, if you're not going to talk, to mute your mic just so that we don't get extraneous sounds on the line here. Walter and I were having a bit of a conversation about the pros and cons of familiar hymns rather than unfamiliar hymns. I think we need both, which is why we sang Ride On in Majesty last Sunday, as well as the new one in my church. Yeah, various different people in the chat talking about hymns and singing. Well, somebody went to a cemetery to mark the anniversary of lived one's death. Somebody came to me in church after church on Sunday and said, "I'm going to visit Ernest today." I said, "Give him my best." We buried Ernest 3 years ago. She was going to visit him on Palm Sunday. I said, "Well, give him my best." Muscle memory and spiritual practices for pastoral care. Found ourselves singing familiar hymns. Muscle memories to do research, and that was my approach to a church task that came up. Our habits ground us, don't they? I found Ren's stuff really evocative. I've been pondering all week how much we do with intentionality and how much we do out of habit, and how our habits grow out of our intentions. We're switching gears again today. This is our last session, and we're moving back into looking at the lyrics of a specific hymn. Our guest today is Walter. Walter's been a part of our group I think he's been here for every session. So lovely to have him on the line, and maybe he'll correct some of the things he said when I recorded him. But he took this hymn, uh, Voices United 694, and wrote beautifully and evocatively and thoughtfully about it. And I thought before we jump into his reading, it would be a good idea just to remind ourselves how the hymn goes. So again, this is a recording that my music director Nancy Singla made for us when we were in the middle of COVID. We used this hymn during at least one of our worship services, probably two or three, and it's just now in our library of recorded hymns. So in this particular one, you don't see her, but she's the one singing. She's also the one playing the piano, and the words will be on the screen. So as long as you have your mic muted, you're welcome to sing along. Don't open your mic though, because we'll be out of sync. But feel free to sing along, and we'll not just read these words, we'll actually hear them sung. Another hymn that may not be as well known to you, but I love the sort of minor haunting tune that one is set to as well. Do you know this hymn? Tell me what stands out for you in that, a word, a phrase, a thought. A new one, Gail. Ah, there stands God, says Shelley. Yes. Maybe I should have put all the lyrics up on the slide if you don't know it. Jesus' bleeding feet we track, keeping watch above God's own. By the light of burning martyrs, what a visual, says Jan. The image of a scaffold. We forget that the cross is a scaffold, but that's what it is. It's a instrument of execution. The strife of good with falsehood, keeping watch, God keeping watch over God's own. Oops, sorry. As you think about these crunchy words, how do the words and the music mesh? That's one of the things we've talked about a lot in this group. What do you think this is a good tune for those words, and why? Here, there's the lyrics from the Voices United CD-ROM, just in case you don't know it. I don't know whether that's it's probably too small to see easily, but I'll throw them up in case it's useful to you. It has an ancientness to it. It's haunting and sad. Arla says, I still sing once to every man in nation to get the impact of making that choice alone. Yeah. And that's part of what Walter's going to talk to us about. Marie says, beating rhythm places me in a wartime setting of soldiers marching. Seems the setting for difficult choices of fighting or not. Beth wonders whether major key would have been better than minor key. If you're not a musician, the major key is a little happier. The minor ones are a little more somber. Because we're running just a little long on time, I'm going to skip over my next question. I was going to ask you about how this fits into Holy Week, but I think we'll just jump straight into Walter instead. So here's the piece that Walter wrote in the book. And as with each of our guests, I've asked him to read it so that you can hear it in his voice as well as just see his words on the page. So here we go.
There are moments in our personal and communal lives when we must decide, actually choose to take or not take a pivotal pathway. We must choose despite the ambiguities and contradictions built into the choice, into the action. In this Lenten season, we remember that Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem. There he would confront and be confronted by the leaders of state and religion. He would be accused, scorned, and condemned as a revolutionary, a traitor, a heretic, a fool. Such choices are not made easily by those who must make them. In heart and soul, they sense the cost and know it immeasurable, unpredictable. Yet in this moment, this is what's required of them. Such moments of truth happen in the life of a nation, a political party, a denomination, even a local congregation. The hymn, Once to Every Man and Nation, was written by James Russell Lowell in 1845. And the affirmation of this opening line was part of the anti-slavery movement in the United States. Over centuries, global economic and political systems have been built on enslavement. Individuals and systems still exploit, still engage in exploitation, indenture labor, still shrug their shoulders and accept antiseptic collateral damage in war, in revolutions and counter-revolutions, and in environmental disasters. Lowell's hymn appears in Voices United, number 694, with the original lyrics altered, including the first line, which is printed, "To us all, to every nation." To me, the Voices United change dilutes the personal challenge and opts into the safety of us all. Ask someone leaving an abusive relationship, or young environmentalist Greta Thunberg, or defiant comedian turned statesman Volodymyr Zelensky. They each know the particularity of setting one's face toward an unknown outcome. So where today do you know challenge? Who and what situations come to your mind as you consider the urgency and particularity of the hymn 694?
So again, before you get into my discussion questions, what jumps out for you? What came to mind for you as Walter read that? Such choices are not made easily by those who make them, says Beryl. I didn't know the history, says Shelley, or the origin of the original first line. I didn't know the history either. That was really helpful to sort of set this in the anti-slavery movement. I will never think of this hymn the same way. So thank you, Walter, for sharing that with us. Well, we have to be careful not to dilute the original intent, says Rob, just in our effort to be inclusive. Poetry is complicated, isn't it? How do you translate and keep the meaning of the original? And we're going to talk about that some more. I think that's important. Doris says this country is in a time where we need to pray. When we have to decide, says Gail. And still they shrug their shoulders, says Beth. I thought we should start by talking about the text. So there's the opening two lines of Lowell's poem. Do you think it's true? Whether it's to every man or whether it's to us all? Do you think that there is a decisive moment in the strife of truth with falsehood? Is that true? Is it poetic license? Is it just romantic? Is it honest? Does everybody get one? Do we only get one? Is there a singular time, says Gail, or is there a series of them? A series, maybe, says Beth. And Beryl says, sometimes only in looking back do we realize that that was the moment. And it happens throughout life. Fear keeps us from moving. Jan's playing with different wordings to see if we could capture it better and just include it in the rhyming in the rhythm. It is as hard to rewrite poems in the same language as it is to translate them into a different language, I think. So we live in this era of alternative truths, right? I think we really struggle with trying to discern which is the good or the evil side, and I don't think it's always as obvious as the hymn pretends it to be. What do you think? Am I just being depressing? I think it's very seldom that people choose evil. I think it's more likely that we have trouble discerning what is good. It's even harder now with AI, says Beryl. I don't think the easy questions are the good and evil ones. I think the hardest questions in life are the ones where we have to choose the better or the least evil. Yeah, Catherine, the lesser number of evils. But I don't think just because it's harder to discern that we get off the hook and say, oh, we can just sit in the sidelines then. Yeah, there you go. Walter says theorizing becomes another escape. Sometimes we have to choose. We don't have a choice. Not choosing is also a choice. And Donna says the difficulty is there's so many alternatives. If you ask soldiers returning from war, they'll often say, I chose the lesser evil. And Rob says, love remains the filter we need to remember. So, what are some of the ambiguities and complications that we weigh as we are facing the strife of truth and falsehood in our time? I thought that was a great line, Walter. We must choose despite the ambiguities and complications built into the choice. That's honest and it doesn't let us off the hook. So let's name some of those. Beth says, what are we failing to stand up to now that will look the way that slavery does? Yeah, the war in Palestine and Israel, differing political parties. Be affirming, especially with the changing climate in the United States, right? Grants that have been cut off from Harvard University just today. There's a choice that Harvard made to walk away from billions of dollars. There's a choice for sure. That says a recent book on Gaza has this title, One Day Everyone Will Always Have Been Against This. Like the Holocaust, right? So before Walter and I got talking about content, and the content is important, and we'll put that on hold for a second. But before we got talking about content, we talked about editing lyrics and his frustration with the idea that the editor would come in and change the meaning of the text. And so that was my first conversation with him. Let me play that piece to you. Every hymn book editor changes lyrics, right? I mean, they seem to think that's part of their job. And every hymn book editor or editorial committee has a whole series of guidelines around how they do it and why, and it drives authors crazy. I think that's just part of it. And I think we always lose as well as gain. But I don't often hear people talking about what we're losing. I often hear we're talking about what we're gaining. Can you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of changing lyrics that have almost stopped being the property of the author and become the property of the church?
Well, first of all, I'd say that, many of us who write hymns often have written a particular hymn in several versions, making our own word changes to adapt to circumstances and of time and place. So there's that reality. But I think that often, often what's lost is that we know what changes we want to make and why we want to make them, but we don't ask the question, what are we losing by this change? And I think that this hymn is a good example of having lost a lot by going to the generic us, for instance. One of the basic questions that we ask about any ethical question, it seems to me, is who is going to be hurt by us doing or not doing this? Who is going to be helped in any way? Who's going to gain? And that's both a positive and a negative, of course, when you're dealing with the ethical question. So I think that when we look at changes we want to make in a hymn, we should say, what are we losing but by changing this line or that word? I had an example of that just in writing about writing the material that I did write for some of these reflections around a word in my hymn Young Apple Trees, where I speak of crippling fear. The editors made it very clear that they weren't going to use the word crippling. And one of the suggested alternate readings would have been harmful. Well, what a difference between harmful and crippling.
Yes.
And right now, just given the circumstances of our days, if you don't listen to a newscast without hearing the word crippling in terms of the economy or in terms of what's going on in Europe. So just a question, like there are, you look for alternatives, but what are you gaining? What are you losing?
So there's the two lines, the original and the version as it appears in Voices United. What do you think are the pros of making this editorial change? You talked a little bit about what we lost. What do you think we gained by doing that? Was it worth it? And what's appropriate about inclusive language, Shelley? Why is that, apart from the fact that all good lefties are supposed to do it? Why? What's that about? More people feel included? Inclusive language puts the onus on us and on all, rather, all, sorry, Beryl, in this particular case. Marie says, I, as a female, don't feel included by the use of man for all people. Wonder about a different change, says Tammy. Inclusive but less watered down, once to every soul and nation. Maybe. I think words change meaning, and they always do, right? I preached a hymn a few weeks ago on Charles Wesley's wonderful Easter hymn, Hark How All the Welkin Rings. Do you know what we sing? Do you know how the words were changed for that one? Good strong Easter hymn, Hark How All the Welkin Rings. And the editors have changed it to Hark the Herald Angels Sing. Because we don't talk about the welkin anymore. So there are pros. When words change meaning, we have to edit. And then the question is, how do we edit in a way that captures the original meaning? Rob's pointing out maybe in 1860, whatever it was, when Lowell was writing, the women weren't consulted on the decisions. That's pretty sad, isn't it? Go and read the history of Mother's Day, Rob. There was Mother's Day came as an anti-war protest movement led by women, and the same time period that Lowell's writing his poem. So you heard Walter talking about what he thinks is lost by this change in wording. And you've already been doing some imagining of alternative wording. Other thoughts on that and the kind of theological issue that Walter's raising for us in this? Other changes frame the concept of God apart from the old use of masculine only, says Gail. Sure. New words could extend the choice from only once to having more ongoing meaning. The loss of once removes some urgency, says Beth. Mm-hmm. Walter would change man, but not to a plural. These are important things to wrestle with in the music that we sing, because the music, as we've talked all the way through this series, the music in our worship is not just a decoration to the music, to the worship service. It conveys gospel. And so we want to make sure that we are singing the theology that is authentic to our faith and our community and our sense of where God is leading us. To us all leaves the decision to somebody else. Lets us off the hook, says Shelley. Appreciation for Tammy's once to every soul and nation. It's easier when you're writing prose. It's much harder when you're altering poetry because it has to scan. The change of thee to a turns a challenge into a statement, says Walter. So Walter and I moved from there, from the ethics of changing poetry, into kind of pulling apart some of the theology here. So let me move us on into the next part of my conversation with him. There's a substantive difference between the particularity of this hymn and the communal sense of us. Very different things that we do collectively and that an individual might do. Say a little more about that, the particularity of the challenge in this poem.
Well, the particularity, there's a real sense in which Lowell is addressing the individual, but he's also addressing the nation. And we can think of nation just in terms of the country, which is what he was thinking of at the time. But we can also think of the nation as that which represents the collective self, the communal self. So he's saying, we have these decisions. There are these moments when we have critical decisions to make. And sometimes that primarily involves me as an individual. Sometimes it involves me as part of this group or that group. And part of it is you know, a national or even a global response. You know, you think of something like the environmental crises that we pull together and talk about environmental crisis. I mean, that's global.
Mhm.
You know, and I think we need that balance of understanding that there are these personal choices, but there's certainly also the collective choices. And when we I think we lost in the translation or the alteration of that hymn, we lost that sense of each of us must make a decision.
Mhm. There's a tie-in, I think, to 19th century evangelical theology and this sense that we all need to come to Jesus moment. And that morphed at the end of the 19th century into the social justice theology, and the sense that we need to come to Jesus moment not only in terms of our relationship with God, but our relationship with the world and justice. That I think is embedded in this hymn that maybe we lose with the language change. Do you agree with me? Do you see connections there?
Sure, I do. And they're not either ors.
Mm.
Like, it's not about it being solely an individual thing. Like sometimes we characterize that earlier evangelical time with personal choice and to come to Jesus moment. Mm-hmm. But there were many social things that were part and parcel of that. You know, just even think of the relationship in our own country between the temperance movement,
mm-hmm.
Suffragette movement,
yeah.
and the coming to Jesus moment. I think too that like often that decisive moment is only known in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not that in this moment I know I've made this choice and the result will be, or I hope will be, but we make our choices. Yeah. In retrospect, we see that they maybe had great impact, and sometimes I guess we see that they were off track.
Yeah.
That's the reality of life.
Yeah. That in some ways recapitulates a lot of what you've already been saying, but so thinking about that and about all the comments that you've put on the chat already, how do you connect this with the discussion we had on grace 2 weeks ago? I mean, what's the connection between the sort of personal, decisive conversion, come to Jesus moment and grace being at the center of the gospel and what we need, and grace being God's action? My discomfort with evangelical theology is that it puts so much emphasis on human action that we walk away from grace. There's got to be some kind of dialogue, right? Maybe by grace, we recognize those moments of choice. Interesting. Hindsight is always 2020. Why? Says Rob. Or maybe we're always improvising hope, Rob. This is the dialogue we've always had in our denomination between the Methodists who trusted in grace and the Presbyterians who trusted in choice. We it's a good thing we're together. We need them both, right? When we decide later that we made the wrong choice, grace allows us to change and move forward, says Shelley. Thank you. That's well put. By grace, we know ourselves loved and we see others loved as persons, says Walter. And therefore we act. Therefore we decide. For sure. Carla's talking about the election on April 28th. Personal choice that becomes part of a collective choice. I think grace is part of how I tease apart truth and falsehood too, thinking about the opening lines of that hymn. It's because of truth that I'm empowered to choose. But then I need to step up to the plate. So here's what I was talking about. I called it the social justice movement. In the recording, I should have said the social gospel movement. Movement in the early 20th century that included the suffragette movement and the temperance movement and a variety trade unionism and moved us towards church union, in fact, in Canada. Called for both individuals and the nation to have conversion moments, turning points where our values-based decisions shape our future. And they took this sort of personal come to Jesus idea of 19th century evangelism and said the whole nation needs to do this. And we are collectively presented with these decisive moments too. So I was thinking as well, Arla, about the election on the 28th, and without trying to be partisan or promote a party, what's the role of Christians? Here we are in a pluralistic and secular society. How do we how do we influence the decision making around us from our values in a way that is respectful of people who come from different faith traditions or from none, and yet respectful also of the tradition we stand in? We speak our truths even when others don't want to hear it, says Beryl. Remind everyone to care for the vulnerable, says Susan. Maybe just name who the vulnerable are. So, like Lowell was doing in this hymn. Render unto Caesar doesn't mean we exclude God, says Rob. The vulnerable are all of us at one time or another, says Beryl. That really hit me between the eyes in during COVID, Beryl. Um, it's so easy to pray for those other people who need help, the homeless or the sick or the people dying of cancer. And I realized during the pandemic that it's every one of us. We started about 5 minutes late today, so I'm going to beg your indulgence and go on to 5 minutes past the top of the hour. I hope that's okay. And if you have to leave because you got something else coming up, that's fine too. But I have one more um, conversation with Walter that I wanted to share with you, and we can reflect on together. So let me move us along to that one, not because we're done, but because our time is short.
We're using your piece in Holy Week, and so I'm reflecting on the sort of decisive choices that we're called out of each of those disciples that followed Jesus and failed him, as well as of Jesus himself. I guess I take hope in the fact that even when they didn't rise to the moment in Holy Week, they did afterwards.
Imperfectly, yeah.
We're all human.
Of course. And that's the world in which we make our decisions.
Yeah.
But that doesn't get us off the hook for making decisions.
So there are decisive moments, and even when we don't rise to them, all is not lost.
Right. And there's the cost of allowing the decisive moments to just go by without action or without awareness. Let's go back to the line of scripture that starts this. Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem, not knowing, and yet knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the story of, to me, that's so much a part of the story of discipleship, that we are called not only into the ministry of Christ, but into the ministry of Christ that is a costly discipleship that takes us into the suffering of the world. And it's the suffering of the world and the world's people and the earth itself that our suffering, whatever that might be, is part of.
So, two thoughts came out of that for me as I was framing our conversation the other day. First of all, I guess I'm thinking about Palm Sunday, right? And includes the story of Peter denying Jesus 3 times. It feels like that was an example of missing the moment. Wonder what would have changed if he hadn't. Beryl says, I hope it was part of the plan. I wonder if looking back on that with shame made him more willing to step up to the plate next time a moment like this came along. Peter saw the choice that faced him, deny or not. We're often in danger of not recognizing the choice we're making, says Beth. Maybe he would also have been arrested, says Shelley, or maybe he would have gained another Jesus follower. Hopefully, says Beryl, opportunity doesn't knock but once. Thanks, Beryl. It's the trouble with this chat, right? You can't edit what you've written. We have to forgive each other's typos. I thought this was the best line in the whole interview. I've been wrestling with this one ever since since Walter said it. We are called into the ministry of Christ that is costly discipleship, that takes us into the suffering of the world. It's the suffering of the world and the world's people and the earth itself that our suffering is a part of. I think he's right. And then I started wondering, so why would anybody want to do that? What do you think? I mean, that was the quote that just hit me between the eyes as I was reflecting on it this week. What comes to mind for you about that? And then is that compelling or terrifying? We are called and we are listening, says Beryl. That's why we would do it. Because it makes a difference. The unknown, like death, is terrifying. Susan writes, when our son died, I made a commitment that I would do my best to walk with anyone in a similar circumstance, and this grew in a number of fronts into today. It's astonishing how often our pain is what causes us to grow, isn't it? I went through a brutal, awful divorce. I would never wish it on anyone, and I am a better minister because of it. Also a more humble one, to be honest. Those who answer sometimes lose family and friends on the journey. True. We don't fight for truth, and for those who suffer, who will? How else does the world change? It's a kind of interesting parallel to the hymn here. Every person and every nation are suffering in the suffering of the world. And for me, there's a sense of grace that, as small and insignificant as I often find, God needs me. God relies on me. God relies on each of us here at this table, that our lives and our decisions matter in the scheme of things, and the world is different because of what we do. Having a child who has journeyed with addictions has made me a better minister, pastoral care provider too, says someone. John's gospel, Jesus so often ties suffering with love and joy. You are the hands and feet of and voice of Jesus. Christ has no body now but yours, your hands, no hands but yours. That's the one, right? Again, music comes to mind for me. And it doesn't matter if we want to or not. Wanting is kind of beside the point, says Laurel. Thank you. Yes. Now I understand why school emphasized self-care in ministry. Sure. We lead with our pain, but if all we do is bleed on our parishioners, we're no use to anybody, right? Arla says thanks to Walter for the suggestion to read Jonah. I love Jonah. It's my favorite book, I think. So we are not gathering next week. I'm going to give you homework anyway. but you can do it or not as you choose. But as you move through the rest of Holy Week, I'm inviting you to think about this personally. Your life matters. Your decisions make a difference. God is relying on you. So, what decisive moments are you facing as an individual or as a part of the nation or the global community? How are you discerning the good and the evil side? How are you negotiating what Walter calls the ambiguities and complications of the choices you face? Yes, sorry, Gail. I was just looking at the agenda myself and realized that I didn't put that last set of questions in it. I'll update a new version of the agenda as soon as we're done. I didn't notice my typo until I was relying on it myself here, Gail. So thanks. So that draws to a close our whole series. And I want to say thank you. Thank you to Walter, who's here today. It was delightful to have you part of this series all the way through, and to each of you for taking this so seriously and for jumping in on the chat and offering your contributions, your perspectives. It has been a delight and a joy to really wrestle together with this book and with you, and to think about the ways in which the music we sing is central to our faith. So I'm going to, in a minute, put up just a very brief poll. I'm going to invite you to give me just a little bit of feedback and evaluation, and it always helps as we're kind of framing the next projects. But before we jump into that, I'm going to close us off with the prayer that Walter wrote for this session. Unless Walter, you're on the line, why don't you read this for us? You wrote these. I think you should read your words and close off the series and so on. If you can see that clearly, if the words are big enough, would that be okay? Well, you will need to have you on. Oops. There we
All
go.
right.
Thank you.
God of the prophets, the reluctant and the willing, clear our minds, sharpen our perceptions, steel our will, open our mouths, and deepen our compassion. Remind us of those who have been champions of justice, practitioners of mercy, whatever the cost, people of all genders, the young and the old, those who have seen visions and dreamed dreams. Give us courage to act, seeking ways to embody your love for all creation and your passion for all of humankind. Help us recognize, name, and oppose oppression. As you did with Jonah, laugh away our evasions and excuses, our rationalizations and our arguments. Prepare us so that when you call, our answer will be, "Here I am, Lord. Send me." Amen. Amen.
Amen, indeed. And so the blessing of God, Creator, Word, and Spirit be with us all as we move through the rest of Holy Week, the celebrations of Easter, and wherever God invites you to be decisive and faithful and true. Blessings. Amen. So here's this poll, and I invite you, if you have a moment, to add your comments into this before you leave. And otherwise, I'll look forward to connect with you again on another program.